The wind off the Harlem River that night in 1963 was sharp enough to cut glass, a bitter, howling gale that rattled the window panes of the brownstones and sent pedestrians scurrying for the warmth of the nearest radiator. But inside the grand ballroom of the Hotel Teresa, the cold was a distant memory. The air here was thick and heavy, perfumed with the scent of gardenias, expensive tobacco, and the roast duck being served on silver platters. Crystal chandeliers, massive and dripping with light, cast a golden glow over the assembly of Harlem's elite. Politicians, judges, business tycoons, and the quiet, dangerous men who ran the streets sat shoulder to shoulder, their differences temporarily smoothed over by the clink of champagne glasses and the smooth jazz quartet playing in the corner. At the head table, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat with the stillness of a predator at rest. He was immaculate in a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders as if it had been woven directly onto him, his cufflinks catching the light every time he moved his hand to touch the stem of his water glass. To the casual observer, he was the picture of composure, the benevolent godfather presiding over a charity gala designed to fund a new youth center on 135th Street. But Bumpy wasn't looking at the centerpiece or the menu. His eyes, dark and constantly moving, were scanning the room, dissecting the crowd, calculating threats in a language only he spoke fluently. Next to him, Mamie placed a gentle hand on his forearm. Her touch was the only thing that could ground him when the static in his head got too loud. She looked regal, her gown shimmering under the lights, her smile practiced and perfect for the cameras that flashed intermittently near the stage. "Relax, Ellsworth," Mamie whispered, barely moving her lips, keeping her smile fixed for the room. "You're going to crack that glass if you hold it any tighter. It's a party. Try to enjoy the fact that half the city is here to honor you." Bumpy exhaled slowly, forcing his fingers to uncurl from the crystal. "I don't like it, Mamie. It's too quiet. And I haven't seen Juny in 40 minutes. He said he was going to check the perimeter and circle back to the manager's office to make the final drop for the staff payroll. He should have been back at the table by now." Mamie squeezed his arm. "Juny Byard can take care of himself better than anyone I know, besides you. He's probably just charming the kitchen staff or dealing with some minor headache so you don't have to. You're up in 5 minutes. Fix your tie." Bumpy adjusted his silk tie, but the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. Juny Byard wasn't just his enforcer. He wasn't just the muscle that kept the wolves at bay. Juny was his shadow, his right hand, the man who had stood back to back with him in alleyways when the odds were 10-1. They didn't have secrets. They didn't have gaps in communication. If Juny was gone for 40 minutes, when he said he'd be gone for 10, something was wrong. Bumpy's gaze drifted to the front row, table 1. That was where the source of his agitation sat, looking like a Cheshire cat in a sharkskin suit, smiling Jack Moretti. The man was an interloper, a climber from downtown who had been trying to carve out a piece of the Harlem numbers racket for 6 months. He had bought a table at the gala tonight, a generous donation that was nothing more than a public challenge, a way of saying, "I can walk into your house, eat your food, and there is nothing you can do about it because the police commissioner is sitting 2 tables away." Moretti caught Bumpy's eye and raised his glass in a mock toast. His smile was wide, showing too many teeth, a predator's grin that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. Beside Moretti sat 2 of his lieutenants, men who looked uncomfortable in their formal wear, their eyes darting around the room with the nervous energy of people who were used to carrying weapons, not napkins. "I should have had him stopped at the door," Bumpy murmured, his voice a low rumble, "and cause a scene in front of the press." Mamie countered softly, "No. You did the right thing. You let him in, You take his money for the children, and you show him that you are untouchable. That is how you win tonight. The master of ceremonies, a nervous little man with a mustache that twitched when he spoke, approached the microphone. The feedback whine pierced the room for a split second before settling. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests," he began, his voice booming over the sound system. "It is my distinct honor to introduce a man who needs no introduction in this borough, a man whose generosity has built libraries, fed the hungry, and tonight ensures our children have a safe place to learn and grow. Please welcome Mr. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson." The applause was thunderous. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a wave of sound that rolled over the room. People stood up. They respected Bumpy, yes, but more importantly, they loved what he did for them, and they feared what would happen if he weren't there to do it. Bumpy stood up, buttoning his jacket. He leaned down and kissed Mamie on the cheek. "Keep an eye on the side door," he whispered. "If Juny walks in, signal me." "Go," she said, giving him a gentle push. Bumpy walked to the podium with the easy grace of a man who owned the floorboards beneath his feet. He stepped up to the mic, gripping the sides of the wooden lectern. He waited for the applause to die down, letting the silence stretch out, commanding the room without saying a word. When he finally spoke, his voice was rich, calm, and resonant. "Thank you," Bumpy said, nodding to the balcony, then the floor. "Thank you all. We talk a lot about the future. We talk about what we want to leave behind. But the future isn't built on words. It's built on bricks, on mortar, and on the safety of our streets." He was moving into his prepared remarks, the speech he had memorized, but his mind was elsewhere. He was splitting his attention. Part of him was delivering the lines with charisma and power, making eye contact with the donors, smiling at the right moments. The other part of him, the part that had kept him alive this long, was screaming, "Where is Juny?" He scanned the back of the room. The exits were guarded by his men, but they looked relaxed. Too relaxed. They hadn't seen anything. "We build this center not just for the children who get straight A's," Bumpy continued, his voice rising with passion, "but for the ones who have nowhere else to go when the sun goes down. We build it for the ones who need to know that someone in this world gives a damn about whether they live or die." As he said the word die, movement caught his peripheral vision. A waiter was moving through the tables near the stage. This wasn't unusual. Servers were constantly refilling wine glasses. But this waiter was moving wrong. He was moving too fast, his head ducked low, his white jacket slightly ill-fitting. He wasn't carrying a tray. He was beelining for the stage. Bumpy's security detail at the foot of the stage stepped forward, but Bumpy made a subtle motion with his hand, "Stand down." He didn't want a tussle interrupting the speech unless it was necessary. The waiter reached the edge of the raised platform. He didn't look up. He was trembling, visibly shaking. Bumpy paused in his speech, creating a dramatic silence that the audience assumed was for effect. "Can I help you, son?" Bumpy asked, his voice amplified through the room. He played it off as a benevolent moment. The kind man addressing the help. The waiter didn't speak. He reached into his apron pocket with a shaking hand. The security guards tensed, hands moving inside their jackets toward their holsters. If he pulled a gun, he would be dead before he leveled it. But he didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a single, glossy square, a Polaroid photograph. He slammed it face up onto the wooden ledge of the podium right next to the microphone, and then turned and ran. He sprinted back through the crowd, disappearing into the kitchen doors before anyone could process what had happened. Bumpy looked down. The world stopped. The sound of the room, the polite coughing, the clinking glass, the distant hum of the heating system vanished into a vacuum of absolute silence. The photo was fresh. It still carried the faint, acrid scent of developing chemicals, and the surface was slightly damp. But the image was stark and horrifyingly clear. It was taken in the manager's office of this very hotel. Bumpy recognized the dark oak desk, the green banker's lamp, and he recognized the body. Juny Byard was slumped over the desk. His head was turned to the side, his eyes wide open and glassy, staring at nothing. His mouth was slack. But it was the blood that seized Bumpy's heart and squeezed it until it stopped beating. There was so much of it. It pooled on the desk, dripping down the side, soaking Juny's white shirt until it was a deep, dark crimson. Scrawled across the top of the desk blotter, in jagged, finger-painted letters using the blood itself, were 2 words: too late. Bumpy felt a physical blow to his chest, harder than any punch he had ever taken in the ring or on the street. His breath hitched, his vision tunneled until all he could see was that photo. Juny, his brother. The man who had taught him how to tie a tie, the man who had pulled him out of the wreckage of a burning car in '58, the man who knew the names of Bumpy's enemies before Bumpy even knew he had them. Dead. Slaughtered like an animal in a back office while Bumpy stood here in a tuxedo, talking about safety and future. The podium groaned under his grip. Bumpy's knees, usually made of iron, buckled. He stumbled back a half step, catching himself on the microphone stand. The screech of the mic moving violently sent a jolt through the audience. "Mr. Johnson?" Someone called out from the front row. Bumpy couldn't speak. A sound tore itself from his throat, a guttural, wet noise that was amplified by the microphone. It was the sound of a heart breaking in real time. He looked at the photo again, hoping it would change, hoping it was a hallucination. But it remained. Juny's lifeless eyes bored into him. Too late. You were too late. Tears, hot and unbidden, flooded Bumpy's eyes. He didn't try to stop them. He couldn't. The grief was a tidal wave, crashing over his defenses, drowning his composure. For the first time in 20 years, the godfather of Harlem was crying in public. He brought a hand up to cover his mouth, his shoulders shaking with the force of the sob that racked his body. The crowd began to murmur, a low buzz of confusion and concern rising into a panic. Is he ill? What happened? Call a doctor. Mamie was halfway out of her seat, her face a mask of terror, but Bumpy held up a hand, stopping her. He couldn't let her see this, not yet. Through the blur of his tears, Bumpy looked down into the audience. He needed to find a target. He needed to find the reason for this nightmare. His eyes locked onto table 1. Smiling Jack Moretti was no longer smiling. He was beaming. Moretti sat back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, watching Bumpy's breakdown with the satisfaction of an artist admiring his masterpiece. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Bumpy. It was a confession. It was a boast. I did this. I took your heart out of your chest and I made you weep in front of the whole city. You are done. You are broken. Moretti's lieutenant leaned in and whispered something, and Moretti laughed. A silent, shaking laugh that made Bumpy's blood turn to ice. The rage that followed the grief was immediate and blinding. Bumpy wanted to leap off the stage. He wanted to tear Moretti apart with his bare hands, right there in front of the judges and the press. He wanted to burn the hotel down. He wanted to scream until his throat bled. He reached for the handkerchief in his breast pocket. He needed to wipe his eyes. He needed to see clearly to kill. Bumpy wiped his face, the linen harsh against his skin. He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to force the monster of his fury back into its cage so he could think. He looked down at the photo one last time. He wanted to imprint the image of his fallen brother into his mind, to use it as fuel for the war that was about to start. He looked at Juny's face. He looked at the blood. He looked at the desk. And then he stopped. Bumpy Johnson was a man of emotion, yes, but he was primarily a man of intellect. He was a chess player who saw 12 moves ahead. Even through the haze of trauma, his brain was processing visual data, looking for patterns, looking for inconsistencies. It was a survival instinct honed by decades of living with a target on his back. He looked closer at the photo. To the left of Juny's slumped body, knocked over on its side, was a bottle of wine. It was shattered, the glass fragments scattered across the desk, mixing with the fluid. Bumpy squinted. He knew that label. It was a specific vintage of Chianti. Rufino Reserva Ducali. Why was there a bottle of Chianti in the manager's office? The manager, an uptight Irishman named O'Malley, strictly drank whiskey. He hated wine. He called it vinegar. And Juny? Juny didn't drink on the job. Ever. It was the first rule of the inner circle. But smiling Jack Moretti drank Chianti. It was his signature. He ordered it everywhere he went. He had ordered 3 bottles of it for his table tonight. Bumpy's eyes shifted to the blood. In the stark flash of the Polaroid, colors could be distorted. But Bumpy knew blood. He had seen enough of it. Fresh arterial blood, the kind that would result from a kill shot or a slit throat, was bright, oxygenated red. As it dried, it turned dark, almost brown. The liquid pooling around Juny's head and soaking his shirt wasn't bright red. It was dark, translucent, and had a distinct purplish hue where the light hit the edges of the puddle. It looked like wine. The gears in Bumpy's mind slammed into reverse, grinding and sparking as the realization hit him. The shattered bottle, the purple tint, the dramatic staging. The too late scrawled in a medium that was too runny to be coagulating blood. Juny wasn't dead. If Moretti wanted Juny dead, he would have hidden the body. He would have made Juny disappear to leave Bumpy wondering, paranoid, and weak. Or he would have left the body on the street as a warning. To stage a photo? To deliver it during a speech? This wasn't an assassination. This was theater. Moretti had likely ambushed Juny, drugged him or knocked him unconscious, staged the scene with the wine bottle to simulate a massacre, and snapped the photo. Why? Bumpy looked back at Moretti. The man was still grinning, waiting. He was waiting for Bumpy to lose control. He was waiting for Bumpy to scream an order to his men. He was waiting for Bumpy to pull a gun. If Bumpy reacted with violence now, in a room full of police and politicians, it would be over. The police would arrest Bumpy. Moretti's men, undoubtedly stationed at the exits and perhaps even in the kitchen, would open fire in the chaos. Innocent people would die. Bumpy would go to prison for life, or be gunned down in the crossfire. It was a trap. A psychological bear trap designed to use Bumpy's loyalty and grief against him. Moretti was banking on Bumpy being so blinded by the image of his dead brother that he would commit suicide by cop right there on the stage. The tears on Bumpy's face began to dry, replaced by a cold, hard sensation that felt like armor plating sliding into place. The weeping godfather was gone. In his place stood the strategist. Juny was alive. He was likely bound and gagged in that office, or perhaps groggy from a sedative, kept there as a prize to be collected after Moretti watched Bumpy destroy himself. Bumpy needed to get to that office. But he couldn't just run. If he ran, Moretti's men would intercept him. If he signaled his men openly, Moretti would know the gig was up and might actually kill Juny just to finish the job. He needed to mobilize his army without the enemy knowing the war had begun. He needed to clear the path. He needed to lock the room down so that Moretti couldn't escape, and so that Moretti's backup couldn't get in. Bumpy stood up straight. He gripped the podium again, but this time his hands were steady. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the room, grounding himself. He looked out at the sea of concerned faces. He looked at Mamie, whose eyes were wide with fear. He gave her a microscopic wink. She blinked, confused, but she saw it. The signal. "I am in control." Bumpy leaned into the microphone. His voice was lower now, raspy, filled with a gravitas that commanded absolute attention. "Forgive me," Bumpy said. "Forgive me. I was overcome for a moment. The weight of our task, it is heavy. Sometimes it feels too heavy to bear." The audience exhaled collectively. A sympathetic ripple went through the room. They thought he was just an emotional philanthropist overwhelmed by the cause. Moretti's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the script. Bumpy was supposed to be screaming. He was supposed to be broken. Why was he apologizing? But Bumpy continued, his voice gaining strength. "We cannot stop. We cannot let the darkness win. We must protect our house. We must secure our future." He was choosing his words carefully now. He had a set of code phrases drilled into his lieutenants for emergency situations, a language hidden in plain sight. "I look around this room," Bumpy said, scanning the perimeter, locking eyes with his head of security, a man named Tank standing by the east exit. "And I see the doors of opportunity. But sometimes, to protect what is inside, we must close the doors on the past." He emphasized close the doors. Tank straightened up. He caught the command. "Lock the exits. We must ensure that no one leaves the path of righteousness," Bumpy said, turning his gaze to the west exit, where another lieutenant, Silas, was standing. "No one enters into temptation without facing the consequences." Silas nodded imperceptibly. "Hard lockdown. No in, no out. We have a storm coming," Bumpy thundered, raising his voice. This was the signal for maximum readiness. Weapons free, safety off, prepare for immediate combat. And when the storm comes, we must be ready to face the head of the snake. Bumpy looked directly at Moretti as he said head of the snake. Moretti's smile vanished completely. He sat up straighter. He wasn't stupid. He realized the tone had shifted. The grief was gone from Bumpy's face, replaced by a predatory focus that Moretti recognized all too well. The sound of heavy chains rattling echoed from the back of the room. Tank was chaining the double doors shut. The loud clank-clank of the metal handles being barred was audible over the quiet hum of the room. Heads turned. "What's going on?" a donor whispered. Bumpy didn't stop. He had to keep them mesmerized while the trap snapped shut. "There are those who think they can come into our home," Bumpy said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that hissed through the speakers. "They think they can take what is ours. They think they can paint pictures with lies and call it truth." He picked up the Polaroid from the podium. He held it up, not for the audience to see the image, but to show Moretti that he held it. "But tonight," Bumpy said, his eyes boring into Moretti, "we are going to reveal the truth. We are going to show everyone exactly what happens when you try to poison the well." At the east and west exits, Bumpy's men had finished securing the doors. They now moved inward, stepping away from the walls, their hands inside their jackets. They formed a perimeter, cutting off the escape routes. Moretti turned his head checking his six. He saw the doors were barred. He saw the large men moving into position. He looked back at Bumpy, and for the first time that night, fear flickered in his eyes. He realized the Chianti bottle. He realized the mistake. Bumpy saw the realization hit Moretti. He saw the panic start to rise. "I have one last announcement," Bumpy said, his voice calm, terrifyingly level. "It appears we have a plumbing issue in the manager's office. I'm going to need my maintenance crew to go in there and clean up the mess. Immediately." It was the final command. "Go to the office, get Juny, kill anyone in your way." 4 of Bumpy's best men, who had been disguised as guests near the front, stood up in unison. They didn't run. They walked with purpose toward the side door that led to the office corridor. Moretti signaled his 2 lieutenants. They jumped up, reaching for their weapons. "Sit down." Bumpy roared into the microphone, the sound exploding like a cannon shot. The sudden volume made everyone freeze. The band stopped playing. The waiters stopped moving. "My friends," Bumpy said to the crowd, his voice returning to a smooth, deadly purr, "please remain seated. We have a slight security matter to attend to. It involves a pest control problem at table 1. The room was confused, terrified, but frozen. Bumpy stepped out from behind the podium. He didn't need the microphone anymore. He walked to the edge of the stage, towering over Moretti. He held the Polaroid in one hand and pointed a finger at Moretti with the other. "You made a mistake, Jack," Bumpy said, loud enough for the front tables to hear clearly. "You used the Reserva Ducale. Juny hates Italian wine." Moretti's face went pale. He scrambled to stand up, knocking his chair over. "This is crazy, Bumpy. You can't do this here." "I can do whatever I want here," Bumpy said, descending the stairs from the stage, one slow step at a time. "This is Harlem. And you just locked yourself in a cage with the lion." From the hallway behind the stage, a muffled thud was heard, followed by the sound of wood splintering. Bumpy's team had breached the office corridor. Moretti's hand went inside his jacket. "Don't," Bumpy warned, stopping 5 feet from him. "You pull that piece, and you die before it clears the leather. Look around you." Moretti looked. He was surrounded. Bumpy's men had the room locked down. Moretti's backup was outside, stuck behind chained doors. He was alone, trapped in the center of the ballroom, with the man he had tried to break. "You thought he was dead," Moretti hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. "You were crying like a baby." "I was mourning," Bumpy corrected, his voice ice cold. "But now? Now I'm just conducting business." A scream echoed from the hallway, a high-pitched yelp of pain, distinctly belonging to one of Moretti's hired goons. Then silence. Bumpy held Moretti's gaze, refusing to blink. "That sounded like your boy in the back just clocked out. Now, we're going to wait right here, Jack. We're going to wait until my brother walks through those doors, and if he has so much as a scratch on him, the police commissioner over there is going to witness an accident." The tension in the room was a physical weight, pressing down on every chest. The wealthy donors huddled in their seats, realizing they were in the middle of a gang war, but too terrified to move. Then the side door kicked open. Every eye in the room darted to the right. Standing in the doorway, supported by one of Bumpy's men, was Juny Byard. He looked groggy. His white shirt was stained with the purple wine, and he had a nasty bruise forming on his temple. He blinked against the bright lights of the ballroom, shaking his head to clear the cobwebs. In his right hand he clutched the jagged neck of a broken wine bottle, a weapon of opportunity he had grabbed during the rescue. He looked up and saw Bumpy. A weak, lopsided grin spread across his face. "Hey, Bump," Juny croaked, his voice rough. Tell me you didn't drink the wine. It's cheap swill." Bumpy let out a breath he felt he had been holding for an hour. A genuine smile, sharp and dangerous, cut across his face. He looked back at Moretti. "He's alive," Bumpy said softly. Moretti looked at Juny, then back at Bumpy. He knew he had lost the gamble. He raised his hand slowly, surrendering. "Good," Bumpy said. "That means I don't have to kill you for murder." Bumpy stepped closer, invading Moretti's personal space until they were nose to nose. "But attempted murder?" Bumpy whispered. "That still carries a penalty." The air in the ballroom crackled. The trap had worked. The dead man was alive, the exits were sealed, and the enemy was cornered. But the night wasn't over. Bumpy could feel the adrenaline humming in his veins. Moretti wasn't just going to walk away in handcuffs, and Bumpy wasn't the type to let a humiliation like this go unanswered. "Mamie," Bumpy called out without turning around. "Yes, Ellsworth?" Her voice was steady now. "Call the car around back, and tell the band to play something loud." As the band nervously struck up a chaotic, loud rendition of Take the A Train, drowning out the conversation to the rest of the room, Bumpy grabbed Moretti by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo. "You wanted a show, Jack?" Bumpy growled, dragging the struggling mobster toward the side exit, away from the prying eyes of the press, and toward the darkness of the service corridor where Juny was standing. "Let's go backstage. I want to show you the photos I'm going to take of you." The heavy velvet curtains swung shut behind them, leaving the gala in a state of confused, terrified suspension, as Bumpy Johnson dragged his enemy into the dark, ready to exact the price for threatening his brother. The first part of the night was survival. The second part would be retribution. The velvet curtains swept shut with a heavy final swish, severing the connection between the glittering fantasy of the grand ballroom and the stark, dusty reality of the backstage loading area. The transition was instant and jarring. 1 second, the air was filled with the clinking of crystal and the polite murmur of Harlem's elite. The next, it was silent, cold, and smelled of sawdust and old grease. The only sound remaining was the muffled, rhythmic thumping of the bass from the band on the other side of the curtain, a dull heartbeat that seemed to keep time with the adrenaline coursing through Bumpy Johnson's veins. Bumpy didn't just walk Jack Moretti backstage, he marched him. His grip on Moretti's silk lapels was ironclad, a physical manifestation of the control he had just reclaimed. Moretti stumbled, his expensive Italian leather shoes skidding on the concrete floor, his legs struggling to keep up with Bumpy's long, purposeful strides. "Let go of me, Johnson," Moretti hissed, his voice tight with a mixture of indignation and rising panic. He clawed at Bumpy's wrists, his manicured nails digging into the fabric of Bumpy's tuxedo, but it was like trying to pry open a steel trap. "You can't do this. You know who I am. You know who I pay." Bumpy didn't answer. Not yet. Silence was a weapon, and Bumpy wielded it better than anyone. He propelled Moretti past the stacks of folded chairs, past the coiled microphone cables, and slammed him against a brick wall near the freight elevator. The impact knocked the wind out of Moretti, forcing a sharp gasp from his lungs. Bumpy stepped back, smoothing the front of his jacket with a slow, deliberate motion. He looked immaculate, unruffled, as if he were merely pausing to check his watch rather than cornering a rival dawn. "I know exactly who you are, Jack," Bumpy said finally, his voice low, vibrating with a dangerous calm. "You're a tourist. You're a man who looked at a map of Harlem and thought it was just real estate. You thought you could buy a ticket, take a seat at the table, and push the homeowner out of his own chair." Moretti straightened up, adjusting his crooked boatie, trying to summon the arrogance that had served him so well on the streets of downtown. I bought a table because I support the cause, he sneered, though his eyes darted nervously toward the shadows where Bumpy's men were emerging. I'm a businessman, just like you. A businessman? Bumpy repeated, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. A businessman negotiates. A businessman makes deals. You sent a picture of my best friend covered in fake blood to a podium while I was speaking to orphans. That's not business, Jack. That's theater, and it was a bad performance. From the darkened corner near the manager's office door, a low groan echoed. Moretti stiffened. Juny Bard was sitting on a wooden crate, holding a wet rag to the side of his head. He looked rough. His white shirt was a canvas of purple stains. His hair was matted, and there was a distinct swelling above his left eye. But he was awake. He lowered the rag, revealing eyes that were sharp, focused, and burning with a quiet fury. In his other hand, he still loosely held the jagged neck of the Chianti bottle he had carried out of the office. Tell me you didn't pay full price for that wine, Jack, Juny rasped, his voice gravelly but steady. It tastes like vinegar and bad decisions. Moretti looked from Juny to Bumpy, the reality of his situation closing in like the walls of a prison cell. He had banked everything on Bumpy breaking down. He had bet his reputation, his territory, and his safety on the idea that Bumpy Johnson was soft, that the years of philanthropy had dulled his edge. He realized now, with a sickening lurch of his stomach, that the philanthropy hadn't dulled the blade, it had just given Bumpy a nicer sheath to hide it in. He's fine, Moretti stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Juny. See? He's fine. I didn't kill him. It was a prank, Bumpy. A psychological play. That's fair game in our world. You can't clip me for a prank. Bumpy walked over to Juny, placing a gentle hand on his friend's shoulder. He inspected the wound, his eyes narrowing. Tank, he called out softly. From the shadows of the loading dock, Tank materialized. He was a mountain of a man, silent and terrifying, his presence alone enough to lower the temperature in the room. He blocked the exit to the alley, his arms crossed over a chest that looked like a barrel of concrete. Yeah, boss? Tank's voice was a deep rumble. Check the perimeter, Bumpy ordered. I want to make sure Mr. Moretti's friends outside are still enjoying the winter breeze. They ain't going nowhere, Tank grunted. I welded the back door shut myself 10 minutes ago. And the boys are watching the front. The rat is in the trap. Moretti backed up until he hit the brick wall again. You can't kill me here, he said, his voice rising in pitch. The commissioner is in the ballroom. The mayor is here. If I disappear, they'll tear this hotel apart looking for me. You're smart, Bumpy. You won't risk the heat. Bumpy turned back to Moretti, his expression unreadable. He walked over to a service table where a waiter had left a tray of half-empty seltzer bottles and a bucket of melting ice. He picked up a bottle of seltzer, weighing it in his hand. You keep talking about killing, Bumpy said, shaking his head with mock disappointment. It's so crude. You think I want your blood on my floor? I just paid to have these floors waxed. Bumpy uncapped the seltzer bottle. The hiss of escaping gas sounded like a snake in the quiet corridor. You tried to paint a picture tonight, Jack, Bumpy said, stepping into Moretti's personal space. You tried to paint me as a broken man, a man who couldn't protect his own. But the problem with painting pictures is that if you use the wrong colors, the whole thing looks like a mess. What are you doing? Moretti asked, eyeing the bottle. I'm fixing your art, Bumpy said. With a sudden, violent motion, Bumpy splashed the entire contents of the seltzer bottle into Moretti's face. Moretti sputtered, gasping, the cold, carbonated water stinging his eyes and soaking his shirt. What the hell? Are you crazy? He shouted, wiping his face blindly. Tank, Bumpy said calmly. The flask. Tank reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a battered silver flask. He tossed it through the air. Bumpy caught it without looking, his eyes never leaving Moretti's face. He unscrewed the cap and took a sniff. It was cheap rye whiskey, pungent, sharp, and smelling distinctly of a dive bar floor. Perfect, Bumpy murmured. He stepped forward and poured the whiskey deliberately over Moretti's head. He splashed it onto his shoulders, his lapels, and down the front of his shirt. The smell was instant and overpowering. In seconds, the impeccably dressed gangster smelled like he had spent the last 3 days sleeping in a gutter. "This is a $300 suit." Moretti yelled, trying to shove Bumpy away, but Bumpy just sidestepped him. "And now it tells a story," Bumpy said. "You see, Jack, the police aren't going to find a kidnapping victim. They aren't going to find a hitman. When Commissioner Kennedy walks through those curtains, he's going to find a drunk." Moretti froze. The water dripped from his nose. The whiskey fumes burned his nostrils. "What?" "Juny," Bumpy said. "Hand me the prop." Juny tossed the jagged bottleneck he had been holding to Bumpy. Bumpy caught the glass. He took Moretti's right hand and forced the bottleneck into his palm, wrapping Moretti's fingers around it. "Hold that tight," Bumpy commanded. "I'm not holding this," Moretti cried, trying to drop it. Tank stepped forward, grabbing Moretti's wrist and squeezing until Moretti yelped. "Boss said hold it." "Here is the narrative," Bumpy began, pacing back and forth like a prosecutor in front of a jury. Jack Moretti, a known associate of the criminal element, came to the gala tonight already intoxicated. He was making a scene at his table, shouting, disturbing the guests. Bumpy pointed to the curtain. "So, being the gracious host, I brought him backstage to let him cool off, to offer him some coffee. But Jack didn't want coffee. He wanted more money for the poker tables." Bumpy pointed to the door of the manager's office. He stumbled into the office. Bumpy continued. "And he found Mr. Juny Bird, my trusted associate, who was in the process of counting the cash donations from the evening. $50,000, earmarked for the Harlem Youth Center." Moretti's eyes went wide. There was no money. The safe was empty. "I checked it. Of course it was empty," Bumpy smiled, a cold, predatory baring of teeth, "because I hadn't made the deposit yet. But the commissioner doesn't know that. All he knows is that there should be money there. And now, it's gone." "You're framing me for robbery?" Moretti asked, his voice trembling. That's petty. I'm a boss. I don't rob safes." "Robbery?" Bumpy corrected him. "No, Jack. Armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder, and grand larceny. You attacked Mr. Bird with a broken bottle. You beat him, and you stole the charity money. This is insane." Moretti screamed. "They won't believe it. The commissioner saw me at the table. He saw you at the table, acting like a fool." Bumpy countered smoothly. "And he saw me drag you back here. He'll believe you were drunk. He'll believe you snapped when you saw the cash. It's the perfect crime of opportunity." Bumpy paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "Who do you think they're going to believe, Jack? The hero or the drunk?" Moretti began to hyperventilate. He looked at the exit, then at Juny, then at Bumpy. He realized the trap was perfect. "Bumpy, please," Moretti pleaded, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We can work this out. I'll give you the numbers racket on 125th. I'll pull my guys back downtown. Just let me walk out the back door." Bumpy stared at him, his expression hardening into stone. "You threatened my brother," Bumpy said softly. "You made me think he was dead. You made me mourn him. You don't buy your way out of that, Jack. You pay for that. With time." Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor, leading to the ballroom. The velvet curtains parted violently, and light flooded the dim backstage area. Mr. Johnson. It was Police Commissioner Kennedy. He strode in, flanked by 2 uniformed officers and a detective. His face was flushed, his expression thunderous. He looked like a man who had been kept waiting. "I've got people panicking out there, Bumpy," Kennedy barked, his hand resting on his baton. "We saw the chains on the doors. We saw you drag this man out. What the hell is going on?" Bumpy immediately shifted. His posture slumped slightly, his shoulders rounding. He put a hand to his chest, looking like a man who was deeply shaken, but trying to be brave. "Commissioner," Bumpy said, his voice breathless. "Thank God you're here. I apologize for the chains. We had to contain the threat. I was trying to stop him before he hurt anyone else." Kennedy stopped, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He took in the scene. He saw Juny sitting on the crate, blood drying on his temple, his shirt stained purple. He saw Tank standing guard. And he saw Jack Moretti. Moretti looked deranged. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His suit was soaked. The smell of cheap whiskey hit the commissioner like a physical blow. And in his hand, Moretti was still clutching the jagged neck of the wine bottle. "Mother of God," Kennedy muttered. "Moretti? He's crazy, Commissioner," Moretti shouted, dropping the bottle. It shattered on the floor. "He threw whiskey on me. It's a setup. He's framing me." "You're drunk, Moretti," Kennedy said, wrinkling his nose in disgust. "You smell like a Skid Row bum." "It's a trick," Moretti yelled, stepping toward the police. "Check the safe. There's no money. He says I stole it, but there was never any money." Kennedy looked at Bumpy. "What money?" Bumpy sighed, a sound of deep, weary sadness. "The donations, Commissioner. The cash from the gala. Mr. Bird was securing it in the manager's safe. $50,000 for the youth center. I brought Mr. Moretti back here because he was causing a disturbance at table 1, but when we got here, he went wild. He saw the safe open. He attacked Juny. He took the charity money?" Kennedy's face turned a shade of purple that matched Juny's shirt. To a man like Kennedy, stealing from gangsters was one thing, but stealing from a charity event that he was attending? That was a personal insult. "I didn't take anything," Moretti screamed. "Search me. I don't have it." "Where is the money, Johnson?" Kennedy asked, looking around. "He had an accomplice," Bumpy said quickly, pointing to the loading dock door. "A waiter. The one who dropped that photo on the stage earlier. I think Moretti tossed the bag to him right before we cornered him. The waiter ran out the back before Tank could seal the exit." Kennedy turned on Moretti with a fury that was terrifying to behold. "You low-life scum. You come to my district, you crash a charity event, you get drunk, assault a man, and have your goons steal from children? Commissioner, listen to me," Moretti begged. "Look at the blood on his shirt. It's wine. It's Chianti. Smell him." Kennedy looked at Juny. Juny groaned, holding his head. "He hit me with a bottle of wine, Commissioner, smashed it right over my head. Then he started raiding the safe." Juny winced, selling the pain perfectly. "It's wine because he hit him with a wine bottle, you idiot," Kennedy snapped at Moretti. "Cuff him." The 2 officers surged forward. Moretti tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. They slammed him against the wall, wrenching his arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was loud and final. "I have rights," Moretti screamed as they hauled him upright. "I want my lawyer. Johnson, tell them. Tell them the truth." Bumpy looked at Moretti. He walked over slowly, standing toe-to-toe with the man who had tried to destroy him. "The truth?" Bumpy said quietly, so only Moretti and the commissioner could hear. "The truth is, Jack, You shouldn't have come to Harlem. The air up here, it doesn't agree with you. Get him out of here, Kennedy ordered. And book him on everything. Assault, robbery, drunk and disorderly. Put an ab out for that waiter. As the officers dragged a kicking and screaming Moretti toward the exit that led to the waiting squad cars, Kennedy turned to Bumpy. The commissioner's expression softened, replaced by a look of grudging respect and sympathy. "I'm sorry, Bumpy," Kennedy said, taking off his hat and running a hand through his hair. "I had no idea he was this unstable. To think we were all out there eating duck while this animal was planning this. We just have to be thankful no one else was hurt," Bumpy said humbly. "The money? We can raise more money. But I couldn't replace Juny." "You're a good man, Johnson," Kennedy said. "I'll have a detective take a statement from Mr. Bird, but we'll let him get checked out by a doctor first. Go back to your party. I'll handle the press. I'll tell them it was a robbery attempt that was thwarted by your security team." "Thank you, Commissioner." Kennedy nodded and strode out, barking orders to his men. When the door clicked shut, the silence returned to the backstage corridor. But this time it was a warm silence. The tension had evaporated. Juny Byard let out a long, low whistle. He stood up, stretching his back. $50,000? He chuckled, wincing as he touched his head. "Bump, you know we only collected about 12 grand tonight." "Inflation," Bumpy said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Besides, the pain and suffering you went through, I'd say that's worth the difference." "You're paying that back, aren't you?" Juny asked, knowing the answer. "Every dime," Bumpy nodded. "I'll pull it from the reserves tomorrow. The youth center will get their 50,000. Moretti's theft will just turn into my donation." "You're a dangerous man to play cards with," Juny said, shaking his head. He looked at his shirt. "I really like this shirt." "I'll buy you 10 new ones," Bumpy said. "Go, take the service elevator. Get Doc Williams to look at that knot on your head. And Juny?" Juny stopped at the elevator doors. "Yeah, Bump?" "Next time," Bumpy said, his voice dropping an octave, serious and intense. "When you check the perimeter, take tank." Juny nodded slowly. He knew what Bumpy was really saying. "I almost lost you. I can't do this without you." "You got it, boss," Juny said. The doors slid shut, whisking him away to safety. Bumpy stood alone in the hallway for a moment. He looked at the puddle of water and whiskey on the floor. He looked at the shards of the broken wine bottle. He took a deep breath, inhaling the dust and the lingering scent of cheap rye. It was the smell of victory. He turned and walked toward the velvet curtains. Mamie was waiting just inside the curtain line. She had been standing there the whole time, listening, ready to intervene if things went south. When she saw Bumpy, her shoulders relaxed. "Is he gone?" she asked. "He's gone," Bumpy said, taking her hand. "The police are taking him for a ride. I don't think we'll be seeing Smiling Jack for a very long time. And Juny?" "Headache. But he's alive. He's safe." Mamie reached up and adjusted Bumpy's tie, brushing a speck of lint from his lapel. "You have a room full of people out there wondering if they're about to be shot." "No," Bumpy corrected her. "I have a room full of people waiting for their leader to tell them it's okay." He pushed the curtains aside. The moment Bumpy stepped onto the stage, the murmur of the crowd died instantly. 400 faces turned toward him. They were scared, confused, clutching their pearls and their champagne flutes. They had seen the police run through. They had heard the shouting. Bumpy walked to the podium. He didn't rush. He moved with the easy grace of a man who owned the building, the block, and the borough. He gripped the sides of the lectern and leaned into the microphone. "My friends," Bumpy said, his voice rolling over the crowd like warm honey, "I apologize for the interruption. It seems that success attracts envy and light attracts moths. The crowd leaned in. "We had an intruder," Bumpy explained, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "A troubled soul who thought he could come into our house and take what belongs to the children. He was mistaken." A few people chuckled nervously. "The police have removed him," Bumpy continued, "and while there was a minor incident regarding the donation safe, I want to assure you of one thing." He paused, looking directly at the camera of a news reporter who had set up near the front. "The Harlem Youth Center will be built," Bumpy declared. "Every dollar that was pledged tonight will be honored. If I have to lay the bricks myself, and if I have to pay for every bag of cement out of my own pocket, that center will open." Applause started in the back, a slow clap that quickly grew in speed and volume. "Because we do not let fear run this city," Bumpy's voice rose, booming now. "We do not let thieves and cowards dictate our future. We stand together, we protect our own, and we keep moving forward." The applause turned into a roar. People stood up. The tension that Moretti had engineered, the fear he had tried to plant, was gone. In its place was something stronger: solidarity. Bumpy had taken the chaos and transmuted it into loyalty. He stepped back from the podium, waving to the crowd. He walked down the stairs to the floor, where Mamie was waiting. "You're good," she whispered in his ear as the band struck up a celebratory, upbeat jazz number. "Almost too good." "I had to be," Bumpy replied, guiding her back to their table. As he sat down, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. He picked up his water glass. His hand was trembling slightly, just a tremor, imperceptible to anyone but him. He looked at the empty seat where Moretti had been. He looked at the exit where the police had left. The photo of Juny, the fake bloody photo, was still in his pocket. He could feel the sharp corner of it against his chest. He would keep it. He would frame it. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that in this life, you could never look away. You could never assume you were safe. And you could never, ever let them see you bleed. A waiter approached the table, looking nervous. "Mr. Johnson, can I get you anything else? Maybe some wine?" Bumpy looked at the waiter. He looked at the bottle of red wine on the tray. "No," Bumpy said, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. "No wine tonight, just water. And bring the check. I think I'm ready to go home." The waiter nodded and scurried away. Bumpy sat back, listening to the music, watching his people dance, watching his city survive another night. The king was still on his throne. The challenger was in chains. And the brother was alive. It was a good night in Harlem.
Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.